What I'm about to tell you is a story that will shake you to your core. It's about a young woman named Kelly Brooks, an 18-year-old with her whole life ahead of her, who vanished without a trace in the wilderness of Yellowstone National Park. For 7 long years, her family mourned her. They believed she was gone forever. But then, in a moment that defied all logic and reason, Kelly walked into a police station, barely recognizable, her body broken, her spirit shattered. And what she revealed about those 7 missing years, it's something that will haunt you long after this story ends. This isn't just a mystery. It's a testament to human resilience and a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. As we journey through Kelly's story together, you'll discover not just what happened to her, but valuable lessons that could protect you and your loved ones from ever experiencing a similar fate. So settle in, because this is going to be a long journey, one that will take us through despair, horror, hope, and ultimately, a kind of redemption. But I promise you this, every single moment of Kelly's story matters. And before we begin, if you believe that everyone deserves fairness, that the truth should always come to light, no matter how long it takes, hit that subscribe button right now. Because we're going to uncover mysteries like this one, stories that demand to be told, cases that deserve justice. Don't miss out on what's coming next. Now, let's go back to where it all began. August 12th, 2014. It was supposed to be a perfect day. Kelly Brooks woke up that morning in her family's home in Billings, Montana, with excitement buzzing through her veins. She'd been planning this hiking trip for weeks, meticulously preparing, studying trail maps, checking weather forecasts, packing and repacking her gear to make sure she had everything she needed. Kelly wasn't some reckless teenager looking for thrills. No, she was careful, responsible, the kind of young woman who color-coded her class notes and never missed a deadline. Her parents, David and Susan Brooks, had raised her to be independent and cautious in equal measure. And she loved the outdoors. There was something about being surrounded by nature, the towering pines, the crisp mountain air, the silence broken only by birdsong, and the crunch of boots on trail that made Kelly feel truly alive. Yellowstone's Specimen Ridge Trail had been on her bucket list for over a year. It wasn't the most popular trail in the park, which was exactly why Kelly wanted to hike it. She craved solitude, a chance to clear her head before starting college in the fall. At 7:30 that morning, Kelly kissed her mother goodbye, promised to check in regularly, and loaded her backpack into her silver Honda Civic. "Be safe, sweetheart," Susan called from the doorway, waving as Kelly pulled out of the driveway. "Always am, Mom," Kelly shouted back, grinning. Those would be the last words Susan would hear her daughter speak in person for 7 years. The drive to Yellowstone took about 2 hours. Kelly's phone records would later show she made several calls during the drive, one to her best friend Emma, another to confirm her trail permit, and a quick call to her dad just to say she loved him. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Everything seemed perfectly safe. Kelly arrived at the Specimen Ridge trailhead at approximately 9:45 in the morning. Surveillance footage from the park entrance showed her pulling up in her Honda, smiling at the ranger who checked her permit and heading toward the trail with confident strides. She wore a blue rain jacket, black hiking pants, and carried a bright orange backpack loaded with supplies, water, energy bars, a first aid kit, a compass, and a map. She even had a satellite emergency beacon, just in case. Kelly Brooks was prepared for everything, or so she thought. At 11:30, Kelly sent her mother a text message. It read, "Trail is beautiful, so quiet out here. Almost no one around. Love you." Susan responded immediately. "Love you too, baby. Stay safe." Kelly sent back a heart emoji. That was the last communication anyone would ever receive from Kelly Brooks. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, when Kelly didn't check in as promised, Susan felt the first flutter of worry in her chest. By 3 o'clock, that flutter had become a pounding drumbeat of fear. She called Kelly's phone 17 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. David tried to calm her down. Cell service was spotty in Yellowstone, he reminded her, and Kelly was probably just out of range. But Susan's mother's intuition was screaming that something was terribly, terribly wrong. By 6 o'clock that evening, when the sun began its descent behind the mountains, and Kelly still hadn't made contact, David called the park rangers. Within an hour, a search operation was underway. And that's when the nightmare truly began. Rangers combed Specimen Ridge Trail throughout the night, calling Kelly's name into the darkness, sweeping their flashlights across the rugged terrain. They found her car exactly where she'd parked it, locked, undisturbed, with her purse still inside. But there was no sign of Kelly. The next morning, search and rescue teams expanded their operation. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors slicing through the mountain air. Search dogs were brought in, trained animals that could track a scent across miles of wilderness. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, friends, neighbors, complete strangers who'd heard about the missing girl and wanted to help. David and Susan Brooks stood at the command center, their faces gray with exhaustion and terror, watching as teams deployed across the vast expanse of Yellowstone. "We'll find her," a ranger assured them, his voice kind but his eyes uncertain. Days turned into a week. The search area expanded to over 50 square miles. Every inch of Specimen Ridge Trail was examined. Caves were explored. Riverbanks were searched. Nothing. It was as if Kelly had simply evaporated into thin air. And then on day 9 of the search, they found something. A lens cap. Kelly's lens cap, to be precise, the one from her camera, the expensive DSLR she'd saved up for months to buy. It was found nearly 3 miles off the main trail, wedged between 2 rocks in an area so remote and treacherous that investigators couldn't understand how Kelly would have ended up there. Had she gotten lost? Had she wandered off the trail, disoriented, panicking as darkness fell? Or had something or someone led her there? The lens cap raised more questions than it answered. If you believe criminals should not walk free, if you believe justice must be served no matter how long it takes, show your support by hitting that like button right now. Because what happened to Kelly Brooks demands justice. And we're only just beginning to understand the full scope of this nightmare. The search continued for another 3 weeks. But as summer gave way to autumn and the first snows began to dust the mountain peaks, hope began to fade. The official search was called off in late September. The final report from the National Park Service was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Kelly Brooks was presumed dead. The official conclusion: probable accident. Perhaps she'd fallen from a cliff. Perhaps she'd succumbed to exposure. Perhaps, and this was the theory that haunted Susan Brooks most, she'd been attacked by a wild animal and her remains dragged somewhere they'd never be found. Yellowstone is vast, unforgiving, and filled with predators. It's not uncommon for people to vanish there, swallowed by wilderness that stretches as far as the eye can see. The Brooks family held a memorial service in October. They buried an empty coffin. Friends and family gathered to mourn a vibrant young woman whose life had been cut tragically short. Susan sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe. David stood rigid and silent, his hand gripping his wife's shoulder like a lifeline. They returned home to a house that felt hollow and wrong. Kelly's bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it, her bed made, her hiking boots by the door, her college acceptance letter pinned to her bulletin board. Life went on, as it always does, even in the wake of unbearable loss. But the Brooks family was forever changed. Susan developed insomnia, lying awake night after night, tormented by questions that would never be answered. David threw himself into work, trying to outrun his grief. They attended support groups for families of missing persons. They lit candles on Kelly's birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance. And deep in their hearts, in a place they couldn't even acknowledge to each other, they clung to a tiny, impossible hope. Maybe somehow Kelly was still out there. In the weeks and months following Kelly's disappearance, theories began to multiply like wildfire. The official investigation had concluded with probable accident, but that explanation satisfied almost no one, least of all the people who knew Kelly best. Online forums dedicated to missing persons cases seized upon Kelly's story with obsessive interest. Amateur detectives dissected every detail, constructing elaborate theories about what might have happened on that quiet August day. Some of these theories were grounded in logic. Others ventured into the realm of pure speculation. But all of them reflected one simple truth: people needed answers. The most obvious theory, and the one officially favored by the National Park Service, was that Kelly had been attacked by wildlife. Yellowstone is home to grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, and mountain lions. All of them are capable of killing a human. And while fatal animal attacks are rare, they do happen. Investigators pointed to several pieces of circumstantial evidence that seemed to support this theory. First, Kelly's lens cap had been found miles off the main trail, in rugged terrain. Had she wandered away from the path, perhaps trying to photograph wildlife, and gotten too close to a dangerous animal? Grizzly bears are particularly dangerous when surprised or when protecting their cubs. A bear attack would explain why Kelly's body was never found. Bears sometimes drag their kills to secluded locations to feed. But there were problems with this theory. Kelly was experienced enough to know the dangers of approaching wildlife. She carried bear spray in her backpack, though it was never found. And there were no signs of a struggle near where the lens cap was discovered. No torn clothing, no blood, no disturbed earth suggesting a violent encounter. The area was eerily pristine, as if Kelly had simply dropped the cap and vanished. Another theory focused on the possibility that Kelly had gotten lost. Specimen Ridge Trail is challenging, with several unmarked offshoots that can confuse even experienced hikers. Could Kelly have taken a wrong turn, realized her mistake too late, and become hopelessly disoriented? Hypothermia and dehydration can set in quickly in the wilderness. People who are lost sometimes make irrational decisions, shedding clothing, wandering in circles, collapsing in places where they'll never be found. But again, this theory had holes. Kelly was carrying a map, a compass, and a GPS device. She was careful, methodical, not the type to panic and make foolish choices. And then there were the darker theories. The ones that suggested Kelly's disappearance wasn't an accident at all. Several people on the trail that day reported seeing a white van parked near the trailhead. The van had left by the time rangers arrived to investigate Kelly's disappearance, and attempts to track it down proved futile. Could Kelly have been abducted? Yellowstone attracts millions of visitors each year. Among them, statistically, are criminals, people with violent histories, people fleeing the law, people looking for vulnerable targets. A young woman hiking alone would be an easy mark for someone with terrible intentions. But there was no evidence of foul play. No witnesses reported seeing Kelly with anyone else. No signs of a struggle were found anywhere along the trail. And while the white van remained a tantalizing lead, it could have belonged to anyone, a tourist, a park employee, someone completely unconnected to Kelly's case. Without concrete evidence, the abduction theory remained just that, a theory. As months turned into years, Kelly's case grew cold. It joined the unfortunate ranks of unsolved disappearances in America's national parks, a list that numbers in the hundreds. Most of these cases are never solved. The families are left with nothing but questions and grief. But here's what we can all learn from this moment in Kelly's story, and I need you to pay attention, because this lesson could save a life someday. When someone you love goes into an unfamiliar or risky situation, establish a clear communication plan. Set specific check-in times. Share your exact location with someone you trust. Use apps that allow real-time location tracking. And if someone misses a check-in, even by a few minutes, don't wait to raise the alarm. In cases like Kelly's, the first few hours are absolutely critical. If you want to see the truth behind unsolved mysteries, if you're committed to uncovering the facts no matter how disturbing they might be, hit that subscribe button right now. Because we're about to take this story in a direction you never saw coming. 7 years passed. 7 long years, during which the Brooks family slowly, painfully learned to live with their loss. Susan started volunteering with a foundation that supported families of missing persons. David retired early, unable to summon the energy he'd once had for his career. They sold their house, too many memories, too much pain, and moved to a smaller place across town. Kelly's case was filed away, gathering dust in some forgotten corner of a government office. The rangers who'd searched for her moved on to other cases, other emergencies. The volunteers who'd combed the wilderness looking for any trace of the missing girl went back to their lives. The world forgot about Kelly Brooks. Everyone except her parents, who never stopped hoping against hope that somehow, somewhere, their daughter was still alive. And then in November of 2021, the impossible happened. November 14th, 2021. It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon in Cody, Wyoming, a small town about 50 miles from Yellowstone's east entrance. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where life moves slow and steady, where nothing much ever happens. Sarah Martinez was working the checkout counter at Morrison's Grocery, the only supermarket in town. It had been a quiet shift. A handful of customers buying milk and bread, retirees picking up their Sunday newspapers, families stocking up for the week ahead. Sarah was counting down the minutes until her shift ended when the automatic doors slid open. And in walked a woman who would change everything. At first, Sarah didn't think much of it. The woman was thin, painfully thin, actually wearing oversized clothing that hung off her frame like she was a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. Her hair was long and tangled, hanging in greasy ropes around a face that seemed somehow wrong. Not disfigured, exactly. Just wrong. Like she'd forgotten how to arrange her features into normal human expressions. The woman clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her hand and moved through the store with jerky, uncertain steps. Sarah watched as the woman grabbed items seemingly at random: bread, peanut butter, a can of soup, crackers, bottled water. She moved like someone who wasn't used to being in a grocery store, pausing to stare at displays as if they were completely foreign to her. When she approached the checkout counter, Sarah got her first good look at the woman's face. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes looked ancient. Haunted. There were bruises on her arms, Sarah noticed. Fading yellow-green marks that suggested they were weeks old. "Just these items?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice friendly and normal, despite the unease creeping up her spine. The woman nodded but didn't speak. Her hands trembled as she placed her items on the conveyor belt. Sarah rang up the purchases, watching the woman from the corner of her eye. Something was very, very wrong here. "That'll be $23.47, Sarah said. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a wad of crumpled bills. Her hands shook so badly she could barely count the money. As she was fumbling with the cash, the piece of paper she'd been holding fluttered to the ground. Sarah bent to pick it up, and that's when she saw it. A shopping list, written in shaky handwriting. But it wasn't just a shopping list. Scrawled at the bottom, in letters so faint Sarah almost missed them, were two words: "Help me." Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked up at the woman, whose eyes were now fixed on the door, as if she was terrified someone might walk through it at any moment. "Ma'am, are you?" Sarah began. But before she could finish the question, the woman's eyes rolled back in her head. She swayed once, twice, and then she collapsed, crashing to the floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut. If you believe in second chances, if you think everyone deserves the opportunity to escape their nightmare and find their way home, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happened next would crack this case wide open. Sarah screamed for help. Other employees came running. Someone called 911. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and rushed the unconscious woman to West Park Hospital. At the hospital, emergency room staff worked quickly to stabilize their mysterious patient. She was severely dehydrated, they discovered. Malnourished to the point of near starvation. Her vital signs were weak and erratic. But it was the injuries they found during their examination that truly alarmed them. Scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing her arms and legs. Some were old, white lines that had long since healed. Others were fresher, still pink and tender. There were marks on her wrists that looked suspiciously like restraint injuries. Bruises in various stages of healing covered her torso. And perhaps most disturbing of all, her fingernails were cracked and broken, dirt embedded beneath them as if she'd been clawing at something, or trying to dig her way out of somewhere. Dr. Patricia Chen, the attending physician, had been working in emergency medicine for 15 years. She'd seen abuse victims before. She knew the signs. And every instinct she had was screaming that this woman had been through something horrific. When the patient finally regained consciousness, Dr. Chen approached her bedside gently. "You're safe now," she said softly. "You're in a hospital. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's eyes darted around the room, wild and terrified. I need to go," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. I have to finish the list." "What list?" Dr. Chen asked. "The shopping list," the woman said, tears streaming down her face. "If I don't finish it, if I don't get back." She tried to sit up, to climb out of the bed, but she was too weak. She collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing. "Let me go," she begged. "Please, you don't understand. Let me go home." Dr. Chen's heart broke. Home. This terrified, brutalized woman wanted to go home. But Dr. Chen had a sinking feeling that wherever this woman considered home, it was the last place she should be. The hospital contacted the Cody Police Department. Detective Marcus Webb arrived within the hour, bringing with him a sense of calm authority that had earned him the respect of everyone in the department. He'd been a detective for 20 years, had worked everything from petty theft to homicide. But when he walked into that hospital room and saw the state of the woman lying in the bed, even his experienced eyes widened with shock. "I'm Detective Webb," he said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "You're not in any trouble, but we need to figure out who you are and how we can help you." The woman stared at him with eyes that held so much fear it was almost physical. "I can't tell you," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because they'll know. They'll know I told someone." "Who will know?" But the woman just shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Detective Webb tried a different approach. "Do you have any identification? A driver's license? Anything with your name on it?" The woman shook her head. "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" Another headshake. This was going nowhere. Detective Webb stepped out of the room and consulted with Dr. Chen. "We need to fingerprint her," he said. "It's the only way we're going to figure out who she is." Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll authorize it." An hour later, the woman's fingerprints were run through the national database. And that's when everything changed. Because the fingerprints came back with a match. A match that seemed impossible. A match that made Detective Webb's hands shake as he read the report. The woman in that hospital bed, the terrified, brutalized woman who could barely speak above a whisper, was Kelly Marie Brooks. The girl who'd vanished in Yellowstone 7 years ago. The girl everyone believed was dead. Kelly Brooks was alive. And the nightmare she'd been living was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Detective Webb stood in the hospital corridor, staring at the printout in his hands, as if it might suddenly rearrange itself into something that made more sense. Kelly Brooks. Missing since August 2014. Presumed dead for 7 years. And now, she was lying in a hospital bed 15 miles from where she disappeared, looking like she'd been through hell and back. How was this possible? Where had she been all this time? And what had happened to her? Webb's mind raced through the possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. He called his captain, spoke in low, urgent tones, and within the hour the hospital room was swarming with law enforcement. FBI agents arrived from the Billings field office. The National Park Service sent investigators. A forensic psychologist was brought in to assess Kelly's mental state. But through it all, Kelly remained silent. She answered questions with headshakes or single-word responses. She flinched when anyone approached her too quickly. And most telling of all, she kept repeating the same phrases over and over. "I have to finish the list. They're going to be angry. I need to go home." "Doctor." Chen ordered a comprehensive medical examination. What the doctors found painted a picture of prolonged, systematic abuse. Kelly was 5 feet 6 inches tall but weighed only 93 pounds. Her body mass index was critically low. Blood tests showed severe vitamin deficiencies, scurvy, rickets, anemia. Her teeth showed signs of neglect, with several cavities and early gum disease. But it was the psychological damage that was most concerning. Dr. Lydia Morrison, the forensic psychologist assigned to Kelly's case, spent 3 hours with her that first day. What she observed was textbook trauma response. Kelly exhibited all the signs of someone who'd been held in captivity for an extended period. Hypervigilance, her eyes constantly darting to the door, tracking every movement, every sound. Dissociation moments where she seemed to simply disappear inside herself, her eyes going blank and distant. Learned helplessness and inability to advocate for her own needs or make decisions. And perhaps most disturbing, signs of Stockholm Syndrome. "She's been conditioned, doctor," Morrison explained to Detective Webb in the hallway outside Kelly's room. "Someone spent years breaking down her sense of self, her autonomy, her will to resist." "Can she tell us what happened?" Webb asked. Dr. Morrison's expression was grim. "Eventually, maybe. But right now, she's terrified. Whoever held her did an extremely thorough job of controlling her through fear." "Fear of what?" "That's what we need to find out." Webb returned to Kelly's room, pulling his chair close to her bedside. He softened his voice, made himself seem as non-threatening as possible. "Kelly," he said gently, That is your name, right? Kelly Brooks? A long pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, a nod. Kelly, your parents have been looking for you for 7 years. They never stopped hoping you were alive. Would you like me to call them? Kelly's eyes widened in what might have been hope or terror. Webb couldn't tell which. They think I'm dead? She whispered. They thought you were dead, Webb corrected. But you're not. You're here. You're alive. And they're going to be so happy to know that. Tears streamed down Kelly's face. I wanted to come home, she said, her voice breaking. I tried. I tried so many times. What stopped you? Kelly's gaze dropped to her hands, which were twisting the hospital blanket into knots. They told me if I tried to leave, they'd kill my family. They said they knew where my parents lived. They described our house, the blue shutters, the rose bushes my mom planted, my dad's truck in the driveway. They knew everything. Webb felt rage building in his chest. Who, Kelly? Who told you this? But Kelly was shaking her head now, panic rising in her eyes. I can't, she gasped. I can't tell you. You don't understand what they'll do. Kelly, listen to me, Webb said firmly. You're safe now. Whoever held you can't hurt you anymore. Yes, they can. Kelly's voice rose to a shrill pitch. You don't know them. You don't know what they're capable of. She was hyperventilating now, her whole body shaking. Dr. Chen rushed in and administered a mild sedative. Kelly's breathing slowly returned to normal, but her eyes remained wild with fear. Over the next several hours, detectives tried various approaches. They showed Kelly photographs of known offenders in the area, hoping she might identify her captor. She shook her head at each one. They asked about physical locations, basements, cabins, anywhere she might have been held. Kelly closed her eyes and retreated into silence. They even tried the direct approach, asking her plainly, where were you for the past 7 years? But Kelly's only response was to whisper, in the dark. I was in the dark. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the shopping list that Sarah Martinez had found on the grocery store floor. One of the FBI forensic experts examined it under specialized lighting and discovered that it wasn't Kelly's only writing on the paper. There were other words, written so faintly they were nearly invisible. Words that had been written, then erased, then written again. As if Kelly had been trying to communicate something, but kept second-guessing herself. The lab tech enhanced the image, bringing the ghost words into visibility. And what they saw made everyone in the room go cold. Beneath the mundane items on the shopping list, bread, peanut butter, soup, Kelly had written other things. Names. Dates. And a single address. Comment, I stand for justice, if you're not siding with the bully. If you believe that people like whoever did this to Kelly deserve the full weight of the law brought down on them. I read and replied to every comment, because your voice matters in seeking justice. The address on the list was 3847 Hollow Creek Road. Detective Webb's hands trembled as he entered it into his GPS. It was less than 8 miles from the hospital. Less than 8 miles from where Kelly had collapsed in that grocery store. For 7 years, while everyone searched the vast wilderness of Yellowstone, while her parents mourned and held memorial services and slowly learned to live with their loss, Kelly had been right here. Hidden in plain sight. Locked away in a place so close to civilization that she could probably hear traffic on nearby roads. But before we go any further, I need to share something important with you. One thing we can learn from this part of Kelly's story is the critical importance of keeping clear lines of communication with loved ones, especially when they're in unfamiliar or risky situations. If Kelly had been using a location tracking app that her parents could monitor, if she'd had a check-in system that would alert authorities automatically if she missed it, if there had been better coordination in those first critical hours, maybe her 7-year nightmare could have been prevented. Or maybe, and this is what haunts me, maybe not. Because what Detective Webb and his team were about to discover was that Kelly's abduction wasn't some crime of opportunity. It wasn't a random act by a disturbed individual who happened to cross paths with a vulnerable hiker. No, this was something far more calculated, far more sinister, and far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. 2 days after Kelly's fingerprints identified her, she was stable enough to be transferred to a more secure location. The hospital wasn't equipped for the level of security this case now required. Someone had held Kelly Brooks captive for 7 years. That someone was still out there. and Detective Webb had no intention of letting them get anywhere near Kelly again. She was moved to a safe house, a nondescript building owned by the FBI, used for protecting witnesses and victims of violent crimes. 24-hour security. No windows visible from the street. Multiple exit points in case of emergency. Dr. Morrison continued working with Kelly, slowly building trust, gently coaxing her to share her story. It was painstaking work. For every question Kelly answered, there were 10 she refused to address. For every small detail she revealed, there were hours of silence. But slowly, so slowly, it felt like watching ice melt in winter. Kelly began to open up. The first real breakthrough came on the third day. Dr. Morrison was sitting with Kelly in a small, comfortable room designed to feel as unthreatening as possible. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, warm colors on the walls. "Kelly," Dr. Morrison said gently, "I know you're afraid. I know whoever held you made you believe terrible things would happen if you talked. But I need you to understand something." Kelly looked up, her eyes red from crying. "The only way to truly be free of them is to tell the truth. As long as you carry their secrets, they still have power over you." Kelly was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I wasn't allowed to say their names. That was one of the rules. If I said their names, even just whispered them to myself, they said they would know. They said the walls could hear." Dr. Morrison leaned forward slightly. "There are no walls here that can hear except mine, and I'm on your side. I promise you, Kelly, whatever you tell me stays between us until you're ready to share it with others." Kelly's hands twisted in her lap. "There were 2 of them," she said finally. "A man and a woman. Husband and wife." Dr. Morrison kept her expression neutral, but her heart was racing. This was it. This was the break they needed. "Can you tell me anything about them?" Kelly closed her eyes. "The man. He called himself Simon. I don't know if that was his real name. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, dark hair, but it was going gray. He had glasses, wire-rimmed. And the woman? Alice. That's what he called her. She was shorter, blonde hair, but I think it was dyed. She was the one who brought me food. She was the one who—" Kelly's voice broke. Dr. Morrison waited patiently. "She was the one who made the rules," Kelly continued. "Simon was cruel, but Alice was the one who really scared me, because she was so calm about it all. Like it was completely normal to keep someone locked in a basement." "A basement?" Dr. Morrison asked carefully. Kelly nodded. "That's where I was. In a basement. They'd renovated it, made it so I couldn't escape. There was a bed, a bucket, a small sink. That was it, no windows, just one door with 3 locks. How did they take you, Kelly? Do you remember?" Kelly's eyes grew distant. "I was on the trail, Specimen Ridge. I'd hiked for about 2 hours when I realized someone was following me. I turned around and saw Simon maybe 50 yards back. At first, I thought it was just another hiker. But something felt wrong. The way he was looking at me." She shuddered. "I started walking faster. But then Alice appeared on the trail ahead of me. She was smiling. Said she and her husband were lost. Could I help them find their way back to the trailhead? I should have run. God, I should have run. But I was raised to be polite, to help people. So I stopped." "What happened then?" "Simon came up behind me. I remember thinking it was weird, them approaching me from both sides like that. And then Simon pulled out a cloth and pressed it over my face. It smelled sweet, chemical. I tried to fight, but everything went dark so fast." Tears were streaming down Kelly's face now. "When I woke up, I was in the basement. They'd stripped off my hiking clothes and put me in this gray dress, like a prison uniform. My hands were zip-tied. I screamed for hours, but no one came. No one could hear me." Dr. Morrison's own eyes were wet. She'd heard a lot of terrible stories in her career, but there was something about Kelly's quiet, matter-of-fact recounting that made it all the more heartbreaking. "How long were you in that basement, Kelly?" 7 years, 2 months, and 14 days. The precision of that answer chilled Dr. Morrison to her core. "You counted?" "Every single day. It was the only way to hold on to who I was. They tried to make me forget my name, forget my family, forget that I was ever anything other than theirs. But I counted the days, and I remembered." "You're so strong, Kelly," Dr. Morrison said softly. Kelly shook her head. "No, I'm not. If I was strong, I would have fought harder. I would have escaped sooner. I would have—" "Stop," Dr. Morrison interrupted gently. "What happened to you wasn't your fault. None of it. You survived an unimaginable situation. That takes more strength than you know." Kelly was silent for a moment. Then she said something that would haunt everyone who heard it. "I have to finish the list." "What list, Kelly?" "The shopping list. That's why they let me out that day. Alice said I could go to the store if I promised to come back. She said if I told anyone, if I tried to run, they'd know. They'd kill my parents, so I had to finish the list and go back." Dr. Morrison's blood ran cold. "Kelly, you do understand that you don't have to go back, right? You're free, you're safe." But Kelly was shaking her head, her eyes wide with panic. "No, no, you don't understand. I didn't finish the list. I didn't get everything. They're going to be so angry. I have to go back before they—" She was hyperventilating again. Dr. Morrison spent the next hour talking Kelly down from her panic attack, reassuring her that she was safe, that no one was going to make her go anywhere. But even as Kelly's breathing steadied, even as the sedatives they gave her pulled her into sleep, she kept whispering the same thing. "I have to finish the list." Subscribe for more mind-bending mysteries that challenge everything we thought we knew about the darkness that can hide in ordinary places, in ordinary people. Because what Detective Webb was about to discover would prove that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like your neighbors. Sometimes they smile at you in the grocery store. Sometimes they're the last people you'd ever suspect. Armed with the address from Kelly's secret message, Detective Webb assembled a team. This had to be handled carefully. If whoever lived at 3847 Hollow Creek Road was indeed Kelly's captor, Webb couldn't afford to spook them. He needed hard evidence. He needed a warrant. And, most importantly, he needed to make sure there weren't other victims. The address belonged to a modest two-story house set back from the road, partially obscured by overgrown trees and hedges. Property records showed it was owned by Simon and Alice Wayne. Married for 12 years. No criminal records. Simon worked as an accountant at a small firm in Cody. Alice was a part-time librarian. On paper, they were unremarkable. The kind of couple you'd never look at twice. Webb ran background checks on both of them. Nothing suspicious came up. No red flags. No prior arrests or complaints. Simon Wayne had lived in Wyoming his entire life. Graduated from the University of Wyoming with a degree in business. Alice had moved to Wyoming from Oregon 8 years ago, shortly before meeting Simon. They were, by all accounts, normal. But Detective Webb had been in law enforcement long enough to know that normal was often a carefully constructed facade. The most dangerous predators were often the ones who blended in perfectly. He obtained surveillance footage from the Morrisons' grocery where Kelly had collapsed. The tech team enhanced the footage, tracking Kelly's movements frame by frame. And there in the parking lot, visible for just a few seconds, was a vehicle. A dark blue sedan, parked in the far corner of the lot. The driver was visible through the windshield. A woman with blonde hair. Facial recognition software ran the image through databases. The match came back. Alice Wayne. She'd been there. Watching. Making sure Kelly followed through with the shopping trip. Making sure she came back. Webb felt rage building in his chest. This woman had let Kelly go into that store, knowing how desperate and terrified she was, knowing she might ask for help. And Alice had been ready to intervene if Kelly tried anything. It was calculated. Cold. Monstrous. But they still needed more evidence before they could move. Webb assigned a surveillance team to watch the Wayne house around the clock. For 3 days, they documented Simon and Alice's movements. Every morning at 7:30, Simon left for work. Every evening at 6, he returned. Alice followed a more irregular schedule, sometimes leaving the house for hours, sometimes staying home all day. On the 4th day of surveillance, something happened that made Webb's blood run cold. Alice went to the grocery store, the same Morrison's grocery where Kelly had collapsed. The surveillance team followed her, watched as she bought the exact same items that had been on Kelly's list. Bread, peanut butter, soup, crackers, bottled water. When she returned home, She carried the groceries inside, and then approximately 30 minutes later she went into the backyard and threw all of it into a trash can. The bread, still in its wrapper. The soup, unopened. All of it, discarded like it meant nothing. But it did mean something. It meant Alice knew that Kelly wasn't coming back. It meant she was covering her tracks. And it meant that time was running out. Webb made the call to his captain. We need to move now. If we wait, they might destroy evidence. Or worse, they might run. 12 hours later, at 6 a.m. on a cold November morning, a tactical team surrounded the Wayne house. Webb was there, wearing a bulletproof vest, his hand resting on his service weapon. The signal was given. Police, search warrant, open the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the front door opened. Simon Wayne stood there in pajamas and a bathrobe, looking confused and sleepy. What's going on? He asked, his voice mild and utterly calm. Simon Wayne, we have a warrant to search these premises. Step outside with your hands visible. Simon complied without resistance, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. Is this about a tax issue? Because I can explain. This isn't about taxes, Mr. Wayne. Where's your wife? Alice? She's still in bed. What's this about? Officers moved through the house systematically. They found Alice in the bedroom, exactly where Simon said she'd be. She seemed equally confused, wrapping herself in a robe and asking questions no one answered. While Simon and Alice were detained outside, the search team went through the house methodically. Living room. Normal. A couch. A television. Family photos on the walls. Kitchen. Clean, organized, nothing out of the ordinary. Bedrooms. Unremarkable. Bathroom. Standard. For a terrible moment, Webb wondered if they'd made a mistake. What if Kelly had been confused? What if the trauma had scrambled her memories? And then one of the officers called out from the hallway, Detective, you need to see this. There was a door that, at first glance, looked like a coat closet. But when they opened it, they found stairs. Stairs leading down into darkness. And at the bottom of those stairs, the basement, Kelly's prison. Subscribe if you believe predators should never go unnoticed, that evil hiding behind a mask of normalcy must always be exposed and brought to justice. Because what the search team found in that basement would prove that Kelly's 7-year nightmare was even worse than she'd described. Here's another lesson we can take from this. Never underestimate seemingly ordinary people. In cases like this, perpetrators often blend in perfectly. They're your neighbors, your coworkers, the friendly couple at church. They smile and wave and seem completely normal. But behind closed doors, behind locked basement doors, they reveal their true nature. Stay aware. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why, don't ignore that feeling. It might save someone's life. The stairs creaked as Detective Webb descended into the darkness. Behind him, crime scene investigators followed, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air was stale and cold. It smelled of mildew and something else, something that made Webb's stomach turn. Fear. This place reeked of fear. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy door. Not just any door, a reinforced steel door with 3 deadbolt locks on the outside. Someone had gone to considerable expense to make sure this door couldn't be opened from the inside. One of the officers produced a lockpick kit. It took him less than 2 minutes to get through all 3 locks. The door swung open with a screech of rusted hinges, and Webb stepped into a nightmare. The room was approximately 12 feet by 15 feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, currently dark. One of the investigators found a light switch outside the door and flipped it. The bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the space. And Webb saw what Kelly had lived in for 7 years. In one corner was a metal-framed bed, more like a cot, really with a thin, stained mattress. A single gray blanket. A flat, discolored pillow. Beside the bed was a bucket. Webb didn't need to look closely to know what it had been used for. Against the far wall was a small sink, the kind you might find in a utility room. No hot water tap. Just cold. And that was it. That was the entirety of Kelly's world for 7 years. But it was the details that made it truly horrifying. Scratches on the walls, desperate, clawed marks where Kelly had tried to dig her way out with nothing but her fingernails. The concrete was hard and unforgiving, and all she'd accomplished was breaking her nails and bloodying her fingers. But she'd kept trying. Near the bed was a tally. Marks carved into the wall with what looked like a small piece of metal, maybe a nail she'd found, maybe something else. 2,579 marks. 2,579 days. 7 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Exactly what Kelly had said. She'd counted every single day of her captivity. Kept track even when she had no calendar, no daylight. No way to know if it was Monday or Friday or any day at all. One of the crime scene investigators, a woman named Carla Jenkins, who'd been doing this job for 20 years, started crying. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "That poor girl." Webb felt his own throat tighten. He'd seen a lot of terrible things in his career. But this was different. This was evil, pure, and calculated and sustained over years. "Photograph everything," Webb ordered, his voice rough. "Every inch of this room. I want documentation that will leave no doubt in any jury's mind what happened here." As the crime scene team worked, Webb climbed back upstairs. Simon and Alice Wayne were sitting in the back of separate patrol cars, handcuffed, waiting. Webb approached Simon's vehicle first. "Mr. Wayne, I'm placing you under arrest for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. You have the right to remain silent." As Webb recited the Miranda rights, he watched Simon's face carefully. Most people, when confronted with evidence of a serious crime, showed some kind of emotion: anger, fear, denial, panic. But Simon Wayne showed nothing. His face was perfectly blank, calm, almost serene. Like this was all just a minor inconvenience. "I'd like to speak to my attorney," Simon said politely. "You'll have that chance," Webb replied. He moved to Alice's patrol car. Alice, unlike her husband, was crying. Big, dramatic sobs that shook her shoulders. "I don't understand," she wailed. "What is this about? Why are you doing this?" Webb opened the car door and crouched down so he was eye level with her. "Mrs. Wayne, we found the basement." Alice's tears stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. Her eyes met Webb's. And for just a second, less than a heartbeat, Webb saw something cold and calculating flash across her face. Then the tears started again, even louder than before. "I don't know what you're talking about. Simon must have done something without telling me. I had no idea." "Save it," Webb said flatly. "We have surveillance footage of you watching Kelly Brooks at the grocery store 4 days ago. We have her testimony. We have the basement. You're done." Alice's face crumpled. "He made me," she whispered. "Simon made me do it. I was afraid of him. He said if I didn't help, he'd. But Webb was already walking away. He'd heard enough. Back inside the house, the crime scene team had found more evidence. In Simon and Alice's bedroom, hidden in a locked drawer, was a journal. Now, after hearing about these findings, we're about to dive deeper into uncovering the content of the journal and the investigation that followed. To give you a fuller picture of what happened, I'm handing things over to my friend Jackson, who will guide us through the next part of this chilling story. Take it away, Jackson.
Simon's journal. Detailed notes about Project Isolation, that's what he'd called it, page after page documenting his preparations for kidnapping Kelly. He'd researched her for months before the abduction, knew her hiking habits, knew her routes, knew she often hiked alone. The journal included photographs of Kelly taken from a distance, at her favorite coffee shop, walking to class at the community college, loading her car with hiking gear. Simon had stalked her, studied her, chosen her deliberately, and the journal explained why. Subject exhibits ideal characteristics, one entry read: independent, physically healthy, minimal social media presence, family structure, stable but not overprotective, perfect candidate for long-term isolation study. Study, he'd called it a study. Like Kelly was a lab rat, like her 7 years of torment were some kind of scientific experiment. Further into the journal, the entries became even more disturbing. Simon had documented every aspect of Kelly's captivity. What she ate, how much she slept, how she reacted to various forms of psychological manipulation. He treated it all with clinical detachment, noting her progress toward what he called complete dependency and submission. There were entries about Kelly's escape attempts. Apparently, in the first year, she tried to break out 6 times. Each attempt was documented in detail, along with the corrective measures Simon had implemented: food deprivation, extended periods in darkness, psychological torture. Zidalian. By year 2, Kelly's escape attempts had stopped. Subject has achieved acceptance of situation, Simon wrote. Psychological conditioning successful. One of the FBI agents reading the journal had to step outside. He threw up in the Wayne's rose bushes. Meanwhile, deeper in the basement, investigators found something else: a hidden compartment in the wall, behind a loose concrete panel. Inside were items that had belonged to Kelly: her driver's license, her phone, long dead but preserved carefully, a necklace her grandmother had given her, photographs of her family. Simon had kept all of it, trophies of his crime. But there was something else in that hidden compartment, something that made every investigator on scene stop what they were doing and stare in horror. Another driver's license, not Kelly's. This one belonged to a woman named Rebecca Martinez, age 22 in the photo. Long dark hair, bright smile, reported missing from Oregon in 2011. 3 years before Kelly's disappearance. "Oh God," Webb whispered. Kelly wasn't the first. A frantic search of the property began. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The backyard was excavated. The area around the house was scoured. But they found no trace of Rebecca Martinez. No body, no evidence of what had happened to her. Just that driver's license, hidden away like a secret. Share this video if you believe criminals should not walk free, if you think people capable of such calculated evil should face the full consequences of their actions. Because what happened to Kelly, and possibly to Rebecca Martinez, and who knows how many others, demands justice. And that justice was about to be served. But first, investigators needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. They needed to know everything about Simon and Alice Wayne, who they really were, what had motivated them, and whether there were other victims they didn't know about. Here's another critical lesson from this part of Kelly's story. Small signs can be huge clues. Kelly's behavior in that grocery store, her trembling hands, her fearful glances, the note she'd hidden on her shopping list, all of it were cries for help. Sarah Martinez, the cashier, noticed. She paid attention, and her vigilance quite literally saved Kelly's life. So if you see someone who seems to be under duress, who's acting strangely, who appears frightened or controlled, don't look away. Don't assume it's not your business. Ask questions. Call the police if necessary, because your awareness, your willingness to get involved, could be the difference between life and death for someone who desperately needs help. Simon Wayne was born in Casper, Wyoming in 1971. By all accounts, his childhood was normal. Middle-class family, 2 parents who worked regular jobs, 1 younger sister. He did well in school, not exceptional, but solid. He played in the school band. He volunteered at the local library. Teachers described him as quiet but pleasant. Friends, the few he had, said he was kind of a loner, but nice enough. There were no warning signs, no violent outbursts, no cruelty to animals, none of the classic markers that criminologists look for when profiling future predators. Simon went to college, got his accounting degree, got a job. For 40 years, he lived an utterly unremarkable life, and then he met Alice. Alice Graham was born in Portland, Oregon in 1978. Her childhood was less stable than Simon's. Her father left when she was 6. Her mother struggled with alcoholism. Alice bounced between foster homes for several years before aging out of the system at 18. She worked odd jobs, never staying in one place for long. In 2012, she moved to Cody, Wyoming, looking for a fresh start. She got a job at the library where Simon was a regular patron. They struck up a conversation one day over a book about wilderness survival. Simon was immediately fascinated by her. Later in his journal, he would write, Alice understands. She sees the world the way I do. She doesn't judge. She doesn't question. She simply accepts. What Simon saw as acceptance was actually something much darker. Psychological evaluations conducted after her arrest would reveal that Alice had severe attachment disorder, likely stemming from her unstable childhood. She latched onto Simon with an intensity that bordered on obsession. And Simon, who'd spent his entire life feeling disconnected from other people, unable to form real emotional bonds, found in Alice someone who would do anything to keep him. Anything, including help him kidnap and imprison a young woman. The police investigation uncovered that Simon and Alice had been planning Kelly's abduction for nearly 8 months before they actually did it. They'd researched missing persons cases, studying which ones got solved and which ones went cold. They'd learned that disappearances in wilderness areas were notoriously difficult to investigate. No witnesses, vast search areas, wildlife that could destroy evidence. Just time perfect. They'd renovated their basement over the course of 6 months, installing the reinforced door, soundproofing the walls, setting up the minimal plumbing. They told their neighbors they were creating a home gym. No one questioned it. Why would they? Simon and Alice seemed like a normal couple doing normal home improvement projects. The day they took Kelly, they'd driven to Yellowstone in a rented van, the white van that witnesses had seen in the parking lot. They'd waited on Specimen Ridge Trail, knowing from their research that Kelly hiked there regularly. So, when she appeared alone and unsuspecting, they'd executed their plan perfectly. Alice approached from the front, Simon from behind. The chloroform knocked Kelly out in seconds. They carried her to the van, drove back to Cody, and locked her in the basement, all within a 6-hour window. By the time search and rescue teams were deployed, Kelly was already 50 miles away from where everyone was looking for her. Imprisoned in a basement while helicopters buzzed overhead, searching for her in the wrong place entirely. Simon's journal detailed the first weeks of Kelly's captivity. Subject resisted initially, expected, refused food for 3 days, implemented starvation protocol until compliance achieved. Starvation protocol, clinical language for deliberately withholding food until Kelly was so weak and desperate that she'd do anything for a meal. Subject attempted escape 6 times in first year. Each attempt met with appropriate correction. By month 14, escape attempts ceased. Psychological conditioning proceeding as planned. Correction, such a sanitized word for torture. Yeah. But it was Alice's role that perhaps disturbed investigators most. Because while Simon had orchestrated everything, had planned it all out with meticulous precision, Alice was the one who'd made it work on a day-to-day basis. Alice brought Kelly her meals, always the same thing, plain oatmeal and water, just enough to keep her alive. Alice enforced the rules Simon had created. No speaking unless spoken to, no questions, no crying, complete obedience at all times. And Alice was the one who'd occasionally shown Kelly small mercies. An extra blanket when the basement got too cold, a book to read when the isolation became unbearable, only to take them away as punishment when Kelly broke some arbitrary rule. It was sophisticated psychological manipulation, making Kelly dependent on Alice for any tiny comfort, then using that dependency as a weapon to ensure compliance. Stockholm Syndrome doesn't just happen. It's created, carefully and deliberately, by abusers who understand how to break down their victim's sense of self. The investigation also revealed that Kelly hadn't been allowed outside the basement for 7 years. Not once, not until that day, Alice let her go to the grocery store. And even then, it had been a calculated risk. According to Alice's later testimony, when she finally agreed to talk in exchange for a reduced sentence, Simon had been growing bored. The project is complete, he'd told Alice. Subject has achieved full conditioning. There's nothing more to learn. He'd wanted to start over with a new victim. Alice had panicked. She'd grown attached to Kelly in her own twisted way. Letting Kelly go to the store had been Alice's desperate attempt to prove that Kelly was still useful. See, she'd planned to tell Simon. She's so well trained that I can let her out and she'll come right back. The conditioning is perfect. But Kelly, even after 7 years, even broken and terrified, Kelly had clung to one last shred of defiance. She'd written that note. Help me. 2 words that would bring her captor's world crashing down. Comment, everyone deserves respect. If you can't stand people like Simon and Alice Wayne, if the calculated cruelty they inflicted on an innocent young woman fills you with righteous rage. Because people like this don't deserve our sympathy. They deserve justice. And justice was coming. The trial of Simon and Alice Wayne began 14 months after Kelly's rescue. It took that long to build the case, to analyze all the evidence, to prepare Kelly psychologically for the trauma of testifying. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, had overwhelming evidence. Simon's journal, documenting every detail of the crime. The basement itself, photographed and measured and preserved as evidence. Surveillance footage of Alice watching Kelly at the grocery store. Expert testimony from psychologists about the torture Kelly had endured. And Kelly herself, who, despite her terror, despite the nightmares that still woke her screaming in the middle of the night, was determined to see this through. I want to look at them, she told DA Walsh during preparation sessions. I want them to see that they didn't break me. Not completely. The trial drew massive media attention. I'll say to you, the courtroom was packed every single day. Journalists from across the country descended on Cody, Wyoming. The case had everything that captured public attention. A shocking kidnapping, years of captivity, a dramatic rescue. But for Kelly and her family, it wasn't entertainment. It was the culmination of 7 years of nightmare and 14 months of painful healing. On the first day of trial, Simon Wayne walked into the courtroom wearing a neat suit and tie. His expression was calm, almost bored. He looked like he was attending a business meeting, not facing charges that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. Alice, by contrast, looked devastated. She sobbed as she was led to the defense table. Her attorney had already made it clear they were pursuing an abuse defense. Alice would claim she was Simon's victim too, that he'd manipulated her, controlled her, forced her to participate in Kelly's imprisonment against her will. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by DA Walsh herself. She spoke for 40 minutes, laying out the case in clear, devastating detail. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you're about to hear is a story of calculated evil. Of two people who chose, deliberately, methodically, over the course of months, to destroy a young woman's life. Kelly Brooks was 18 years old when Simon and Alice Wayne kidnapped her. She was a college student with dreams of becoming a teacher. She loved hiking, loved the outdoors, loved her family. She had her whole life ahead of her. And these two defendants took all of that away from her. For 7 years, they kept her locked in a basement. They starved her. They tortured her psychologically. They broke her down day by day, hour by hour, until she almost forgot who she was. But Kelly survived, and now she's here to tell you what they did. And I'm here to make sure that Simon and Alice Wayne never, ever have the chance to do this to anyone else. The defense attorney for Simon Wayne, a man named Robert Thornton, tried a different approach. He didn't deny that Kelly had been imprisoned. Couldn't deny it. The evidence was too overwhelming. Instead, he argued that Simon was mentally ill, that he suffered from a delusional disorder that made him genuinely believe he was conducting legitimate psychological research. Simon Wayne is a sick man, Thornton argued. He needs treatment, not punishment. He genuinely believed he was contributing to scientific understanding of human behavior under isolation conditions. It was a strategy born of desperation. And it wouldn't work. Alice's attorney, meanwhile, painted her as a victim. Alice Graham Wayne is a woman who suffered abuse and neglect throughout her childhood. She developed severe attachment issues that made her vulnerable to manipulation. When she met Simon Wayne, she fell under his psychological control. Everything she did, everything, was because she was terrified of what Simon would do to her if she refused. The first week of trial focused on the physical evidence. Prosecutors presented photographs of the basement. Crime scene investigators testified about what they'd found. The jury saw the tally marks Kelly had carved into the wall. They saw the bucket she'd been forced to use as a toilet. They saw Simon's journal with its cold, clinical descriptions of torture. Several jurors were visibly shaken. One woman had to leave the courtroom to compose herself. The judge called for frequent breaks, but the evidence kept coming, wave after wave of it. Damning, incontrovertible proof of what Simon and Alice had done. In the second week, the psychological experts testified. Dr. Lydia Morrison, who'd worked with Kelly from the moment she was found, took the stand. She explained Stockholm Syndrome, described the sophisticated psychological torture Kelly had endured. What was done to Kelly Brooks wasn't random cruelty, Dr. Morrison testified. It was systematic, calculated conditioning designed to destroy her sense of self and replace it with complete dependency on her captors. Under cross-examination, defense attorneys tried to suggest that Kelly's memories might be unreliable. That trauma could have distorted her recollections. But Dr. Morrison shut that down quickly. Kelly's account has been remarkably consistent. The physical evidence corroborates everything she's told us. Her memories aren't distorted. They're painfully, precisely accurate. And then, in the third week of trial, Kelly took the stand. The courtroom fell completely silent as she was sworn in. She wore a simple blue dress and had her hair pulled back. She looked fragile, her thinness still evident despite months of recovery. But when she spoke, her voice was strong. D.A. Walsh led her through her testimony gently. Kelly, can you tell us what happened on August 12, 2014? And Kelly told her story. Every terrible detail, the chloroform, waking up in the basement, the years that followed, endless, dark, suffocating years. She testified for 2 full days. Sometimes she cried, sometimes her voice shook, but she never looked away. She stared directly at Simon and Alice as she described what they'd done to her. Simon stared back, his expression unchanging. Alice sobbed and wouldn't meet Kelly's eyes. Did you ever try to escape? D.A. Walsh asked. 6 times in the first year, Kelly answered. But they made sure I wouldn't try again. How did they do that? Kelly's hands tightened on the edge of the witness box. They starved me, left me in complete darkness for days, and they threatened my family. Said if I tried to escape again, they'd kill my parents. They described our house in perfect detail, things they couldn't have known unless they had been watching. I believed them. And after you stopped trying to escape, what was your life like? I counted days. That's how I survived. I counted each day and tried to remember who I was. My name, my family, the life I'd had before. Because they tried to make me forget, tried to make me believe that the basement was where I belonged. The cross-examination was brutal. Simon's defense attorney tried to suggest that Kelly had developed feelings for her captors, that she'd become complicit in her own imprisonment. The courtroom erupted in anger. The judge had to call for order. And Kelly, quiet, traumatized Kelly, looked the defense attorney dead in the eye and said, I never stopped hating them. Not for one single second of those 7 years. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was read. Count 1, kidnapping, guilty. Count 2, unlawful imprisonment, guilty. Count 3, torture, guilty. The verdict was the same for both Simon and Alice. Guilty on all counts. Simon's face remained expressionless. Alice collapsed, wailing. Subscribe if you believe justice has been served, but also if you believe we need to do more to protect potential victims before monsters like Simon and Alice can destroy their lives. Because while this case ended with a guilty verdict, there are lessons here that can prevent other cases like it. Sentencing came 2 months later. Simon Wayne was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. Alice Wayne, in exchange for her testimony against Simon and her guilty plea, received a sentence of 25 years. The discrepancy in sentencing sparked outrage. Many felt Alice deserved life in prison just as much as Simon. She'd been an active participant, not just a bystander. She'd brought Kelly her meals, enforced the rules, maintained the psychological torture for 7 years. But the prosecution had made a strategic decision. Alice's testimony and cooperation had helped solidify the case, had helped ensure there would be no appeals based on technicalities. And 25 years was still a significant sentence. Alice Graham Wayne would be in her 60s before she was eligible for release. At the sentencing hearing, Kelly was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. She stood at the podium facing the judge, with her parents beside her. "I want to say that what Simon and Alice Wayne did to me can't be measured in years," Kelly began, her voice steady. "They took 7 years of my life, but the impact will last forever. I still have nightmares. I still flinch when I hear doors lock. I still struggle to trust people. They didn't just imprison my body. They tried to imprison my mind and my spirit." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But they failed. Because I'm here, I'm alive, I'm free, and every day I wake up and choose to keep fighting to reclaim the life they tried to take from me. That's my victory. That's how I beat them." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge had to wipe away tears. When Kelly finished, the judge looked at Simon and Alice. "What you did was monstrous," the judge said. "You targeted an innocent young woman. You planned her abduction with cold calculation. You tortured her for years. You tried to destroy everything that made her human, and you did it all without remorse." Mr. Wayne Parsi, you sit there with no expression, showing no emotion, as if this entire proceeding is beneath you. That tells me everything I need to know about the depth of your depravity. And Mrs. Wayne, you claim you were a victim too, but the evidence shows you were an enthusiastic participant in every aspect of this crime. You may have been manipulated by your husband, but you made choices. You had opportunities to free Kelly, to call the police, to stop the nightmare. You chose not to. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you both spend the rest of your lives paying for what you've done. The gavel fell. Simon and Alice were led away in handcuffs. And Kelly Brooks walked out of that courtroom a free woman. Scarred, yes, traumatized, certainly, but free, and determined to rebuild the life that had been stolen from her. The day Kelly Brooks walked out of prison, no, that's not right. The day Kelly Brooks walked out of the courtroom, free from the legal proceedings that had consumed the past 14 months of her life, that day should have been the beginning of her happily ever after. But life isn't a fairy tale, and trauma doesn't end just because justice has been served. Kelly returned home to her parents' house, the new house they'd bought after selling the one that held too many memories. Susan Brooks had prepared Kelly's room with care. Soft blue walls, the color Kelly had always loved. A comfortable bed with clean white sheets, curtains that let in natural light. Everything designed to be the opposite of the dark basement where Kelly had spent 7 years. But on Kelly's first night home, Susan heard screaming. Rushed to her daughter's room to find Kelly pressed into the corner, hyperventilating, convinced that she was back in the basement. "The walls are closing in," Kelly gasped. "I can't breathe. I can't." It took an hour to calm her down. This became the pattern. Kelly would have good days where she seemed almost like her old self. She'd laugh at something on TV, help her mother cook dinner, sit in the backyard, and feel the sun on her face. And then the bad days would come. Days where she couldn't leave her room. Days where she was convinced Simon and Alice were coming back for her. Days where she couldn't eat because the food reminded her of the bland oatmeal that had been her only meal for years. The psychological damage was profound. Dr. Morrison continued working with Kelly, sessions 3 times a week. They worked on coping mechanisms, grounding techniques for when the flashbacks hit, strategies for managing the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. "Healing isn't linear," Dr. Morrison told Kelly during one session. "There will be setbacks, days that feel like you're right back where you started. But overall, the trajectory is upward. You're stronger than you think. Kelly wanted to believe her. Some days she could. Other days, she was convinced she'd never be whole again. The media attention didn't help. Kelly's story had captivated the nation. Book publishers offered her deals. TV producers wanted to make movies about her ordeal. Reporters camped outside her parents' house, hoping for an interview. Kelly refused all of it. She just wanted to be left alone, to heal in private, to find some semblance of normalcy. 6 months after the trial, Kelly made a decision. She was going back to school. She'd been accepted to college 7 years ago, had planned to start in the fall of 2014. Obviously, that hadn't happened, but now she was going to finish what she'd started. Her parents were worried. Was she ready for this? Could she handle being around so many people? But Kelly was determined. "I can't let them win," she told her father. "I can't let what they did define the rest of my life. I have to move forward." David Brooks looked at his daughter, this brave, broken, beautiful young woman, and felt his heart break and swell with pride in equal measure. "Okay," he said, "we'll support you, whatever you need." Kelly enrolled at the local community college. She started with just 2 classes: Introduction to Psychology and English Composition. The first day was terrifying. The campus was crowded, people everywhere talking, laughing, rushing between buildings. Kelly felt the familiar panic rising in her chest, but she pushed through it, found her classroom, sat in the back row where she could see all the exits. And she stayed. It wasn't easy. There were days when she had to leave class early because a panic attack hit without warning. Days when crowded hallways triggered memories of being trapped, unable to escape. But there were good days too. Days when she lost herself in studying and forgot to be afraid. Days when she contributed to class discussions and felt a spark of the person she used to be. Slowly, painfully, frustratingly slowly, Kelly began to reclaim her life. She made a friend. A woman named Mara who sat next to her in psychology. Mara didn't know Kelly's story at first, didn't know who she was or what she'd been through. She just knew that Kelly seemed shy and sane and could use a friend. They started studying together, got coffee between classes, talked about normal things, homework, annoying professors, TV shows they liked. It was the first real friendship Kelly had formed since her abduction, and it felt like a miracle. 1 year after the trial, Kelly agreed to give an interview. Just one. To a respected journalist who promised to let Kelly tell her story in her own words. The interview aired on national television. Millions of people watched as Kelly Brooks, now 26 years old, talked about her 7-year nightmare and her ongoing journey to heal. "I'm not going to say everything happens for a reason," Kelly said during the interview, "because that would suggest there was some purpose to what was done to me. And there wasn't. It was just evil. Random, senseless evil. But I can choose what I do with it. I can choose to let it destroy me, or I can choose to survive it. And I'm choosing to survive." The interviewer asked if Kelly had forgiven her captors. Kelly's answer was honest and raw. "No, I haven't forgiven them. I don't know if I ever will, and I don't think I have to. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. What's required is choosing, every single day, not to let what they did control me anymore." The response to the interview was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out to Kelly with messages of support. Survivors of other crimes, other traumas, thanked her for speaking out. Parents of missing children found hope in her story, and Kelly realized something. Her nightmare, as terrible as it had been, could serve a purpose. Not because it was meant to happen, but because she could use it to help others. She started volunteering with an organization that supported families of missing persons, the same organization her mother had worked with during the years Kelly was gone. Kelly spoke at support group meetings, shared her story with families who were still searching, still hoping. "Don't give up," she told them, "even when it seems impossible, even when everyone says there's no hope. Don't give up." She became an advocate for better resources for missing persons cases, testified before legislative committees about the need for improved databases, better coordination between jurisdictions, more support for families. Kelly Brooks, who'd spent 7 years unable to speak without permission, was now using her voice to make a difference. 2 years after the trial, Kelly graduated from community college. When associate degree in psychology. Her parents were in the audience crying with pride. Kelly walked across that stage, accepted her diploma, and felt something she hadn't felt in nearly a decade. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. She applied to a 4-year university, got accepted, decided to pursue a degree in social work with a focus on trauma counseling. I want to help people who've been through what I went through, she told her advisor. I want to use what happened to me to help others heal. It was ambitious. It was brave. It was Kelly Brooks reclaiming not just her life, but her purpose. The years continued to pass. Kelly had good years and hard years. There were still nightmares. Still days when the weight of what she'd endured felt too heavy to carry. But she kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept choosing survival over surrender. She maintained strict boundaries, no social media presence, limited interviews. Her privacy was sacred, a thing she'd been denied for so long that she guarded it fiercely now. But within those boundaries, she built a life, a real life. She got her bachelor's degree, then her master's. Started working as a trauma counselor, helping other survivors navigate their own healing journeys. And though the scars of her ordeal would never fully fade, though there would always be parts of her that remained broken, Kelly found something approaching peace. On the 10th anniversary of her rescue, Kelly returned to Yellowstone. Not to Specimen Ridge Trail. She wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. But to a different trail with her parents by her side. They hiked for 2 hours, breathed mountain air, felt sun and wind and the solid earth beneath their feet. And Kelly thought about the girl she'd been, the 18-year-old with dreams and plans and no idea that her life was about to be shattered. She mourned for that girl, for all she'd lost, but she all too recognized the woman she'd become, stronger than she ever imagined she could be, more resilient, more compassionate. More determined to find meaning in the meaningless. I'm still here, Kelly said aloud, her voice carrying across the mountain vista. You tried to destroy me, and I'm still here. David and Susan Brooks stood on either side of their daughter, their miracle, their survivor. And together they watched the sun set over the mountains where Kelly's nightmare had begun, and where, in a way, her healing had started too. Because it was Sarah Martinez, working at a grocery store in Cody, who'd seen Kelly's silent plea for help. It was Dr. Chen who treated Kelly with compassion and recognized the signs of abuse. It was Detective Webb who'd pursued the case with relentless determination. It was the prosecutors, the jurors, the investigators who'd refused to let Simon and Alice Wayne escape justice. And it was Kelly herself who'd held on to her humanity even when everything was being done to strip it away. All of these people, all of these choices, all of these moments of courage had brought Kelly to this moment. Standing on a mountain, breathing free air, despite everything. Thank you for staying with me through Kelly's entire story. I know it was long, I know it was difficult, but it was important. And now, before we end, I want to share with you the 5 crucial lessons we can take from Kelly's nightmare. Lessons that could protect you or someone you love. Share this video if you believe everyone deserves fairness. If you think stories like Kelly's need to be told so that others might be spared similar fates. These lessons are presented in reverse order, starting with the 5th and working our way up to the most critical. Pay attention, take notes if you need to, because what I'm about to share with you could save a life. Lesson 5. Recognize the signs of someone in distress. When Kelly walked into that grocery store, she was exhibiting clear signs that something was wrong. Her trembling hands, her fearful glances toward the door, her overall demeanor of terror barely contained. Sarah Martinez, the cashier, noticed these signs. And more importantly, she acted on them. Most people go through life with blinders on. We're so focused on our own concerns that we don't see what's happening right in front of us. But if we train ourselves to notice, really notice, the people around us, We can spot when someone went in trouble. Look for unusual nervousness or fear in situations that don't warrant it. People who seem to be under someone else's control, constantly checking in, asking permission for basic things, showing signs of being monitored, unexplained injuries, or an unwillingness to discuss where injuries came from. Sudden changes in appearance, especially dramatic weight loss or signs of neglect. Avoidance of eye contact or excessive vigilance, constantly scanning their surroundings as if expecting danger. If you see these signs, don't assume it's none of your business. Don't tell yourself someone else will handle it. Be the someone who handles it. Ask if the person is okay. Offer help. Call the police if you genuinely believe someone is in danger. Your awareness could be the difference between life and death. Lesson 4. The first hours are critical. When Kelly disappeared, her mother knew something was wrong within hours. Susan Brooks called the park rangers the same evening. This quick action, even though it ultimately didn't prevent Kelly's 7-year ordeal, was still the right thing to do. In missing persons cases, the first 24 to 48 hours are absolutely critical. This is when the trail is freshest, when witnesses' memories are clearest, when physical evidence hasn't yet been contaminated or destroyed. Too many families wait. They tell themselves their loved one will come home. They don't want to overreact. They worry about being embarrassed if it turns out to be nothing. Don't wait. If someone you care about is overdue, if they've missed check-ins, if something feels wrong, report it immediately. Yes, sometimes it will turn out to be nothing. Sometimes the person will show up with a perfectly reasonable explanation. But what if they don't? What if those hours you waited were the hours when they could have been found? When Kelly was first taken, she was likely within hours of the search area. If the search had started immediately, if there hadn't been that delay while Susan convinced herself she was overreacting, is it possible Kelly could have been found before Simon and Alice got her back to their house? We'll never know. But the lesson is clear. When it comes to missing persons, act fast, report it. Let the professionals determine if it's a real emergency. Lesson 3. Establish clear communication plans. Kelly was careful about checking in with her parents. She sent that text from the trail. But when her phone lost signal and she couldn't communicate further, there was no backup plan. In today's world, there are so many tools available for staying connected and for tracking locations. Use them. Before anyone in your family goes on a trip, especially solo travel or activities in remote areas, establish clear communication expectations. Set specific times for check-ins, not just vague, "I'll call you later" promises. Use location sharing apps so family members can track where you are in real time. Apps like Life360, Find My Friends, or even Google Maps location sharing can provide peace of mind and crucial information if something goes wrong. Share your itinerary in detail, where you're going, what route you're taking, when you expect to arrive at various points, when you expect to be home. Agree on what constitutes a missed check-in and what the response should be. For example, if I haven't texted by 6 p.m., start trying to reach me. If you can't reach me by 8 p.m., contact authorities. Have a backup communication plan. If cell service fails, what's the alternative? Satellite communicators like Spot or Garmin in reach allow for emergency messaging even when you're completely off the grid. These devices aren't just for extreme adventurers. They're for anyone who might find themselves out of cell range. This isn't about being paranoid or over-controlling. It's about being smart and prepared. Kelly's case shows us that even responsible, careful people can be targeted. Having robust communication plans won't prevent all tragedies, but they can significantly increase the chances of a positive outcome when something does go wrong. Lesson 2, trust your instincts. Kelly felt something was wrong when she noticed Simon following her on the trail. Her instinct told her to be afraid, but her socialization from, her desire to be polite, to help people, to not seem rude or paranoid, overrode that instinct. When Alice approached from ahead, asking for help, Kelly's gut probably screamed at her to run, but she didn't. She stopped. She tried to help, and that decision cost her 7 years of her life. This is not to blame Kelly, not at all. What happened to her was not her fault. But it is a lesson we all need to learn, especially women who are socialized from childhood to be nice, to be helpful, to put others' comfort ahead of their own safety. Your instincts exist for a reason. They're the product of millions of years of evolution, designed to detect danger and keep you alive. When something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate exactly what it is, trust that feeling. Signed. It's okay to be rude. It's okay to ignore someone asking for help if your gut tells you the situation is dangerous. It's okay to run, to make a scene, to do whatever you need to do to protect yourself. Better to feel foolish later if it turns out to be nothing than to ignore your instincts and end up in a situation like Kelly's. Teach this to your children, especially your daughters. Teach them that their safety is more important than being polite, that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to remove themselves from situations that feel wrong. Why? Kelly's instincts tried to warn her. If she'd listened to them, if she'd run when she first felt afraid, her whole life would have been different. Lesson 1. Evil often hides behind normalcy. This is perhaps the most important lesson of all. Simon and Alice Wayne were not obviously dangerous people. They didn't fit the stereotypical image of predators. They were a married couple with normal jobs. They volunteered at the library. They were polite neighbors. If you'd met them at a community event or in the grocery store, you never would have suspected what they were capable of. And that's exactly how predators survive. They blend in. They present a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. They're the last people you'd suspect. This is why you can't rely on someone seeming dangerous. You can't assume that because someone is friendly or well-dressed or has a good job that they couldn't possibly be a threat. The most dangerous people are often the ones who've mastered the art of appearing completely ordinary. So what do you do with this information? You stay alert. You don't let your guard down just because someone seems nice. You pay attention to behaviors, not appearances. You trust your instincts even when logic tells you there's no reason to be afraid. You teach your children that danger doesn't always look like danger. You have honest conversations about the fact that predators are skilled at manipulation, at gaining trust, at appearing safe when they're not. And perhaps most importantly, you support systems and policies that prioritize safety over politeness. Background checks, even for people who seem trustworthy. Accountability in situations where vulnerable people might be at risk. Communities that look out for each other, that don't assume everything is fine just because people maintain a pleasant facade. Simon and Alice Wayne got away with their crime for 7 years, not because they were criminal masterminds, but because they looked normal. Because no one suspected that the polite couple on Hollow Creek Road was keeping a woman imprisoned in their basement. Because we as a society have been conditioned to believe that monsters look like monsters, but they don't. Often, they look like everyone else, and that's what makes them so dangerous. By understanding what happened to Kelly Brooks and by internalizing these 5 lessons, you can take control of your family's safety. You can be more aware, more prepared, more willing to act when something seems wrong. You can teach these lessons to your children and to anyone else you care about. Because knowledge is power, and awareness saves lives. Kelly Brooks' story is one of unimaginable suffering, followed by remarkable resilience. It's a story that shouldn't have happened. A young woman's life shouldn't have been derailed by 2 people's monstrous choices. But it did happen. And now Kelly is using her experience to help others, to advocate for change, to shed light on the darkness that can hide in the most ordinary places. She's a survivor in the truest sense of the word. Not because she simply didn't die, but because she chose actively, daily, to keep living even when living seemed impossible. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Evil exists, it's real, and it's often much closer than we'd like to believe. But so does goodness. So does courage. So does the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to be destroyed even when everything is being done to destroy it. Kelly survived because of her own strength, yes. But also because people cared enough to notice when something was wrong. Because Sarah Martinez saw a terrified woman and paid attention. Because Detective Webb refused to give up until he found answers. Because prosecutors fought for justice. Because a society of people, imperfect as we are, came together and said, no, this will not stand. This will be made right. And that's the final lesson. We're all in this together. Every one of us has a role to play in keeping each other safe, in noticing when someone needs help, in speaking up when something seems wrong, in refusing to accept that tragedies like Kelly's are just inevitable parts of life. They're not inevitable. They're preventable if we're willing to be aware, to be brave, to be engaged with the world around us instead of just passing through it focused on our own concerns. So thank you for listening to Kelly's story. Thank you for caring enough to stick with it all the way to the end. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes in justice, in truth, in the fundamental dignity and worth of every human being. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Like this video if you believe stories like Kelly's need to be told. Share it with anyone who you think needs to hear these lessons. And comment below. Tell me what you took from this story. Tell me if you've learned something that might make you more aware, more prepared. I read every comment. I reply to as many as I can, because this isn't just me talking at you. It's a conversation, a community of people who care about truth and justice. Before you go, check out our other videos. We've covered other incredible real-life stories, other mysteries, other tragedies, other examples of both the worst and best of humanity. Each one has lessons. Each one matters. Thank you again. Stay safe. Stay aware. And remember, the most powerful thing you can do is pay attention, because sometimes attention saves lives.